Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to an American who says every seventh word in a London accent. My name is Evan Edinger, and I hope you like the new setup. Shooting with a 24mm, hopefully a little bit more bokeh, a little bit more closed in. I'm literally losing my mind here at this Airbnb, but hopefully it'll all be worth it when I have my own place. Fast forward a couple weeks, am I right? But today's video is not about my current predicament. It's about the predicament of many people from Europe who visit the US and go, whoa, that's quite shocking. It's a Reddit video. There's a thread here on AskEurope. There's no role in Europe, but I try. Which is people who've been to the USA, what was the biggest culture shock to you? I like making videos about this. I like learning about the little interesting differences that we find in cultures. And so here we go. The first one comes from OP that says, I went to the US in 2014. We landed in San Francisco and had to rent a car. We thought, we're in America, let's rent a big car. So we rented a big car, then joined the 101, and we were the smallest car on the road. So with our redefined car, we went up to the Golden Gate Bridge, but we were hungry. So we stopped by a diner. My brother ordered a burger and a small 7-Up. He got a liter of 7-Up. He wasn't even halfway done, and the waitress came to ask for a free refill. To quantify the bigness would be an insult to the bigly bigness of American lifestyle. Certainly a shock for me. So OP has some very stereotypical things that people are shocked about in America. If we address the one about the car, I do think that's an interesting one. That mostly comes from the fact that our roads are quite wider. You know, the US was built for cars, annoyingly so. Lobbying, blah, blah, blah. Yes, there's much wider roads. And Americans actually have, I think, an even worse culture shock when visiting Europe because the roads are more narrow than they're used to. And they're like, how would you even expect to get your truck down the road? Because no one really drives pickup trucks here. I watched a really interesting video I'll link above the other day about why pickup trucks aren't a big thing in the UK and Europe, but are massive in the US. And Too Long Didn't Watch of it is basically the US, you know, Ford, they really championed it. It's supposed to be that like American freedom tailgating, like you can tow with it, very useful, but they're so wide, right? They're ingrained in our culture. But the streets are just not capable of holding trucks that big in countries over here in Europe. And so they're just really not as popular because why would you buy something that's not as useful? My friend Kim actually specifically told me at one point when I was considering getting an SUV here that if I do, people will cut me off on the road because I'm driving such a behemoth. And that's just basically, don't drive big cars in the UK, specifically because people will hate you. But further on the second point, yes, we all know that US portion sizes are massive, but what I think is most interesting about what they said here was that the waitress came when they were halfway done the drink to refill it. I still consider that good service. And maybe you'd think differently if it was a smaller cup and you'd be like, oh, thankfully, because it just shows that your waiter is actually attentive. Now, you could argue because they're forced to be really nice to you and try and give you the best service possible because they're paid a slave wage, essentially, but I would agree with you, actually. If you're someone that is interested in finding out why the US pays such horrible wages for the serving staff, $2.13 per hour, by the way, I have made a video about this, which I'm very proud of, so give that a check. So next up, we have anytime in the States, I'm always shocked by the amount of homeless people, especially in San Francisco and Los Angeles. Yeah, growing up in a suburb of, you know, New Jersey, of Philadelphia, I guess you could say, I didn't really get to experience much in terms of homelessness. There weren't really many homeless people in my suburb, and most everything I learned about, you know, California was through films and TV shows, which don't really portray how incredibly extensively bad the homelessness crisis is. Obviously, there are homeless people around the world in every country, give or take, and I know that there definitely are homeless people in London, but it's more like you see them and you're like, oh, there's one, oh, there's one. Whereas in like Los Angeles specifically, there are parks that are just, there's nowhere for them to go. They just lie around all over the place, and it's tragic. I just don't think the system is working then. It's working as intended, money goes to the top, but I just personally don't think that's a good idea. Strangers talk to me for no reason. I could be walking on the street and a total stranger would come up to me and say, nice jacket, or something similar. I've said this before, that's nice. I guess it is surprising if you're not used to that. It's like one of those positive stereotypes we have as Americans is that we are a bit more outgoing. Also expecting lots of comments because my hair looks ridiculous right now, but I'm kind of vibing with it. I'm growing it out. Might get a little bun going on eventually. The water level in the toilets. This is, my friend Luke was freaking out about this. I walked into 3 different cubicles in JFK that were seemingly blocked until I realized the States, the water level in the toilets is basically half of the bowl, whereas in Europe, it's just a little butter. It's a little bit of water. I always found that wasteful. I remember at one point I was at a diner with my friend Luke and he said his penis dunked in the water and I was like, what? Big boy, but Also, I don't know why they're made that way. Why do we have so much extra water in the toilet? It really makes it so that when you do poop, kasploosh, it goes right up the way it came out. Not fun. That's because our toilets use a different flushing mechanism. Oh, that's not the photo that I was expecting to see in regards to flushing mechanisms. There's a man on the other side of American toilets. In Europe, the water is just a small amount in the bottom and then everything is pushed down, whereas there's just a lot more in the US. You know, you didn't expect to learn a lot about toilets here, but my channel is a bit shit. Teens addressing adults by first name. Is that a thing in the US as much? I was just freaking out about that being a thing in Finland and Denmark. I'm not used to that. When our school bus driver invited my 16-year-old self to just call him Dave, oh, okay, that is a bus driver thing. I feel like I've not experienced that in much places, but as a kid, I do think my bus driver also is like, just call me Sharon. And I'm like, I don't want to call you at all, actually. I'd rather just be playing my Game Boy back there, thank you. Or doing homework for the next class, because that's always the type of student I was. My wife was shocked by all of the open space and how we horizontally fill up much of it with low, hastily built buildings. Strip malls, hey, that's a big thing in Jersey and such. It's like, you have more space, you know what to do with it, it's true. She was more astonished that you can drive through dozens, sometimes hundreds of miles of empty nothingness with nothing but the road you're driving on to indicate you're still in civilization. It's a big country. I feel like you could say that as a culture shock thing if you visited Russia, just long swathes of roads, assumably, and Canada on their only road from east to west. But I guess, yes, that must be a huge culture shock coming from Europe, where it's much more densely populated, much more smaller towns and things and winding roads. I was doing this so that you knew what I was talking about, okay? I'm about to do some sort of Dragon Ball Z move. I witnessed a mother opening several packs of sugar and sprinkling it into their kids' Coca Cola. I'm speechless. That's, in my opinion, child abuse. First of all, giving your child Coca Cola, this might be a very unpopular opinion for you guys, don't do that. I wouldn't feed my child cake daily, so why would I feed it something even worse than cake? So there we go, not being sponsored by Coca Cola anytime soon. To be honest, the flag salute in school, I could not comprehend it. Sorry, you just aren't a fan of patriotism. I had flashbacks to videos in history class, made me feel super uncomfortable. It makes sense as a culture shock thing, especially if you're someone that's used to not doing that. And I can't really argue anything in favor of like why it's a thing, because it was implemented to instill nationalism and patriotism and just wasn't removed after World War II. And yes, it is freaky, but I honestly don't think there's a way to remove that sort of like brainwashy style cult stuff from schools, because any attempt to do so would probably just cause people to be like, oh, whoa, this guy hates America. And it's like, that's not, tell me if you vibe with this, but it just kind of feels like we're living in some sort of Arthur Miller play, except IRL. Troubling. I was not shocked, but surprised with how dirty the public buildings like airports were, and how low quality the doors, floors, windows, and everything in buildings, including plumbing and electric installations in private buildings, were. Sizes in general weren't as large as I expected, especially cars, which were much smaller than I thought. Well, there we go. Someone said they were the biggest, and someone from Germany said cars were not as big as they were expecting. But interesting that they thought it was really dirty. I've not really found that to be too much of the case. Sure, the streets are absolutely full of garbage in places like New York, but interesting that they thought everything was dirty. The windows here, they only open or close. They don't kip at all. How do you people live? I was mind blown when I found out that most windows that I've had in the UK not only open up, but they also fully open sideways, so you can kind of kip, I guess the expression is, which is so convenient. To counter that, you all don't have screens, okay? Window screens or netting, whatever you want to call it here. Big culture shock for me, huh? Not sure if this counts as a culture shock due to the circumstances, but I say it anyway. When I was a young child, I went on holiday to Florida. I remember going to a museum and seeing non-guns sign at the entrance. Was this French? My mom was trying to explain to young me that the US people regularly carried guns around, and it blew my mind. Pulling out my pendant for this one. Yeah, signs that say no firearms allowed inside read like, don't carry a bomb inside to us. It's almost like saying like no dogs. No dogs, no firearms. Someone from Poland says, I dated 2 American girls, one here in Europe and one in the US Chicago area. First story, things got a little heated, you know. I pull my dick out and she starts to undress, and suddenly I saw that she hesitated, and IDK, I started to feel weird. I asked her if everything was okay, and she said no. I asked her what was wrong, I know where this is going, and she said it's weird that I'm not circumcised. She said cut, which I didn't immediately understand, and that it's kind of gross. Oh, second story, pretty much the same. I pull out my pants and see that the girl is clearly surprised again. It turns out that many Americans are circumcised, not only if they follow Jewish or Muslim religion, and that it's very common to be circumcised. Whether you're circumcised or not circumcised, I don't think is the big issue. I think the issue is how these people dealt with it. Their shock of seeing someone, it was their culture shock, but to say that's disgusting is bizarre, because it's literally the human body that is, for all intents and purposes, unmutilated. But also, when I found out that I was the only man I know that was circumcised out of everyone that I know in the UK, it kind of makes me feel a little bit strange, to be very honest. I mean, most people that have seen my penis are like, wow, it's got a helmet. And I'm like, I know. It doesn't really protect it, though. I think they look cooler, only because I'm biased. Men love their own penis. This video doesn't have a sponsor because we're talking about penises. I was a 17-year-old French guy visiting California, and I was mostly annoyed how much people wanted a hug for no reason. Y'all don't like hugs? I mean, I don't really hug that often, but if it's someone that I know of, or maybe we've met, I like to hug. Hugging is nice. Obviously, in the COVID times, a little bit different. Is that an American thing? Please tell me in the comments if you're from a different culture. Are you pro-hug? Anti-hug? With a stranger, it depends on how much alcohol I've had. Oh, my foot is asleep. No me gusta. Some of these may be region specific, but the poor quality of building standards. That's the second time that's come up. Is that such a big thing? I mean, in the States, I lived in a couple places that were just drywall, and I think that's supposed to be a bad thing, but I always viewed that as convenient because you can just quickly hammer through walls and put things up really fast, but it's very cheaply made. I never would have thought that. I'm actually learning more, despite the fact I make this type of content all the time. Subscribe, obviously, if you haven't yet. We have how popular weed is with older generations. Like people's bosses in work openly smoking weed. I think you might have been in like Colorado, maybe California. Older people from my experience don't. My mom is like, I will never touch the devil's lettuce because I haven't before and I will stay that way. And I'm like, Mom, it's fine. Don't worry about it. You get a little stressed, a little bit of a de-stress. Not my biggest culture shock, but I felt so strange to see windows the size of doors that I could fully open and anyone could fall out. No safety barriers or nothing at a 6-story level. Hey, that goes against the normal stereotype that America bans a lot of things to protect the stupid people and children, like candy with toys in it. So that's kind of nice reverse culture shock there. Dangerous, sketchy, bad neighborhoods just steps away from the main street. I always found this bizarre. Like in Philadelphia, you could be on like a Temple University and it's like full of university students, and then one street over, it's like you will hear gun violence. Speaking of which, I've seen the notorious Tenderloin area, oh my God, and some fellow travelers were freaked out. Then we see a pack of American young girls, bad English, young American girls ambling down the streets talking loudly amongst themselves as if they were walking through a shopping mall. I've stayed at the Tenderloin because it's the cheapest part of San Francisco to stay in. I will highly, if as an influencer, recommend you do not do that. I heard screaming every single night, and I saw people walking around, not an exaggeration, like zombies dragging their legs and crying out from some sort of drug overdose all around the streets. It was freaky. And it is just crazy that that is one of the most affluent cities in the US, also has that. On the first night of my first trip to the USA, we ended up in a restaurant which pretty much all the customers openly carried handguns. That was quite a shock. I have yet to be in a situation in the States like that, so that's kind of like a wild thing. I think I would be shocked as an American who's been living abroad for so long. I would feel uncomfortable. I'm just not really comfortable with the concept, you know, of guns in these days, especially because sure, you're like, oh, well, they have the right to do that. And I'm like, yeah, it's literally like, it is a murder weapon just held out there to protect us from ourselves. Ugh. But a lot of American friends I know are just very passionate about keeping the gun laws. So it's one of those opinions that you can have, and I can be like, oh, I think it's a bad idea, and people can disagree with me, and in the meantime, lots of schools will continue to have problems. In the US exclusively, which it's so frustrating that not a single country has managed to figure out how to stop shootings. If only there was some other way. Just wish I knew. But hey, Europeans, I hope you feel seen today. You've been represented. If you're interested in another type of content like this, I did make this one pretty similar, but yet quite distinct. I hope you enjoyed that if you want to give that a watch. Otherwise, I'll be seeing you next week, hopefully for my final video in this flat, but who knows? Anyway, thank you so much for catching up with me, and I'll see you guys next Sunday. Goodbye.